In the meantime, let's hand back to Palesa to continue with one of the developing stories. Palesa?
Oh yes, indeed, Colin. Thank you so much. One of our top stories this afternoon, the South African Human Rights Commission has ruled on 5 complaints against EFF leader Julius Malema, finding that none of his utterances referred to the body legally constitute hate speech. Now, the statements referred to the commission were made during unrelated and separate occasions. That was between 2016 and 2018. But to get a clearer understanding on this, we are now joined in studio by Rea Simigiannis. She is Executive Director at the Freedom of Expression Institute. Good afternoon to you, Rea. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you for inviting me.
I suppose, as the Commission said during the media briefing, that this was a very difficult one for them to rule on, but your take as the Institute?
Look, as the Freedom of Expression Institute, we fully support and promote freedom of expression in the country. It is one of the central tenets of our democracy, and that is why it's such a such a strongly guarded right and guarantee in our constitution. So we're very careful to protect that right. But sometimes freedom of expression can border on offensive and hate speech. And on the face of it, what we know, okay, they did indicate there were 5 different complaints about different statements that Julius Malema made. But the recent one was about his statement that we won't kill white people, at least not for now. Yeah. And so a complaint was laid against that. While that speech is offensive and it is hurtful, I think it is hurtful and can be harmful from a psychological perspective, the Commission had found that it was not hate speech. And that is because there are certain categories of hate speech. In the Constitution, Section 16 talks about the freedom of expression, but there are limitations to freedom of expression. And the limitations in this case were, you can have freedom of expression unless it's a propaganda for war, unless it's incitement of imminent violence, or if it's advocacy of hatred on a particular group, for example, gender, race, or religious group, and it can constitute incitement to cause harm. Now, there's a debate about should one read all of these statements to determine whether something is hate speech? Should it be propaganda for war and imminent violence and advocacy of hatred of a group, or just one of them? Yeah. But based on the issue of imminent violence, they found that it does not cause it's not going to bring about imminent violence, and that is why they ruled that it wasn't hate speech.
And I suppose it got a lot of us confused as to where do we now draw the line between hate speech, freedom of expression, and offensive language?
Yes, yes. Well, I think with hate speech, probably just about all hate speech will be offensive, but not all offensive speech will be hate speech. It just depends on if it fits within these parameters. I mean, a lot of statements that have been made by the EFF, like, for example, the recent ones against female journalists, you know, using very crude words to name some female journalists, referring to the genitalia, talking about raping them and assaulting them. I mean, that is very hurtful and offensive. And I know that they have been charged with hate speech. I mean, SANF has taken them, you know, for hate speech. So that is offensive and obviously hate speech as well. Offensive speech could just be saying something, you know, just ugly and hurtful to a particular individual. Yeah. I think another thing which will determine whether it's hate speech is if it's affecting a whole group of people. I mean, if I say something to you personally which is going to hurt you, but not necessarily, you know, the group of people, not black female, not all black females.
And part of what the Commission said earlier is, if you look at the entire context of what the speech was based on, then it's not offensive.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Looking at the historical injustices as well that we're facing as black people.
That's right.
So those are some of the issues that they took into consideration.
Yeah. Apparently those are met. I mean, I've seen it with a number of hate speech cases. The context is absolutely crucial. Because I know in the past, Julius Malema, when he sang that song, Kill the Boer, one of the judges found that that was hate speech quite a while back. And then in another case where striking workers at Dunmanneck were striking, they sang the song Hit the Boer. So the Hit the Boer was not found to be hate speech, whereas Kill the Boer was. And the judge in that particular case said, it was the way he said it as well. It said like he was carrying a machine gun and, you know, making those gestures which might imply, you know, that kind of thing. Those kind of things play a role.
Yeah, it does. But at the same time, this is a crucial, sensitive period. We're heading to the elections, and I suppose such speeches, we are yet to see more of such speeches taking place with political leaders trying to lure voters.
Yes, unfortunately, and it's very unfortunate, and I think that's why the Electoral Commission have got certain rules and regulations. I mean, the statements that the BLF had made about those white kids that had been killed when that bridge collapsed at school, saying that we don't care, you know, because they're whites. I mean, those are quite inflammatory statements, and I think that we do need to be cautious. And also, just to mention, just like the Commission, the Freedom of Expression also feels that we try and build a nation and be positive and constructive. So, although it was not hate speech, what was said recently, it's not ideal and appropriate speech.
Yeah, I mean, there's mixed reaction on Twitter regarding this particular decision by the Human Rights Commission. But I suppose we'll leave it at this. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks there to Rea Simigiannis. She is the Acting Executive Director at the Freedom of Expression Institute, giving their reaction to the ruling by the South African Human Rights Commission.